I'm going back, Kusu. Let's go. Kisuke, Tessai. I'll leave the rest to you. Don't be in such a hurry to leave. I still have something to discuss with you. Mr. Tessai, I'll leave the space problem to you. Kisuke instructed Tsukabashi Tessai, then took a few steps forward to follow Muyang. Gently placing the 2 cups of tea in front of Muyang and Suzuki Kusu, Kisuke sat up and poured himself a cup of tea. After taking a sip, Kisuke put down the cup and looked at Muyang and Suzuki Kusu opposite of him. His expression became a bit more serious. Now, what do you think of Kurosaki, Kimura-san? Kurosaki Ichigo, he is very talented. Even in Soul Society, I have never met a few people as talented as him. Muyang recalled the scene he saw before. He was really worthy of being the protagonist. In such a short period of time, he could achieve that level. Kimura-san, you are too modest. Your performance back then was even better than Kurosaki-san. Kisuke covered his chin with a small paper fan and waved to Muyang. What are you going to do next? Muyang ignored Kisuke's teasing and took a sip. Then he asked Kisuke. Next. You know what I'm talking about. With such a big commotion today, they should be coming soon, right, Yoruchi? N. Kisuke was slightly stunned. Then he saw a black cat jump in from the window sill. It walked slowly to the table and found a place to sit down. The black cat looked at Muyang and said in a low voice, as expected of Kimura. Even I was discovered. The black cat turned to look at Kisuke and said, Kisuke, you also felt it, right? Hearing the question of Muyang and Yoruchi, the smile on Kisuke's face gradually disappeared. He nodded and said, it seems that it is impossible to hide. I was thinking that it has been a long time. Should I talk about something easy and pleasant first? Putting down the folding fan in his hand, Kisuke said, the Great Hollow invaded the modern world. I did not think that I could hide such a big thing from Soul Society. Presumably, the Technology Development Bureau has already reported the abnormal situation. And the Gotei 13 will soon start to investigate this matter. As for the matter of Miss Kuchiki privately passing Shinigami's power to the human race, it will be exposed because of this investigation. Their next step is to send people to the modern world to investigate this matter. I just don't know who will be sent to investigate this matter. Although privately passing Shinigami's power to humans is against Soul Society's rules, I don't think it is enough to attract Soul Society's attention. No. Hearing Kisuke's analysis, Muyang suddenly interrupted. Oh. Kimura, do you have a different opinion? Kisuke raised his eyes to look at Muyang and asked. The problem is the one who conducted that was Kuchiki Rukia, not others. You mean? Hearing the word Kuchiki that Muyang emphasized, Kisuke's eyes flashed. Yes, with Kuchiki Byakuya's character, he will come personally. As the head of the 4 great nobles, Kuchiki family, his sister actually violated Shinigami's rules and passed Shinigami's power to human beings. This is definitely something that Kuchiki family's current head, Kuchiki Byakuya, cannot tolerate. After taking over Kisuke's words, Yoruchi affirmed the conjecture in his heart. As the former head of the Shihuin, she was naturally very clear about the character of Kuchiki Byakuya, who was also one of the 4 great nobles. If it is him, it will be bad. Kurosaki-san really has no chance of winning against him. But this is also good. After all, there is no way that Kurosaki-san can resist Soul Society's strength now. Although this result may be more cruel, this can also sharpen Kurosaki-san's strength in fighting against such an opponent. Even if he loses, it will bring him great benefits. However, compared to this matter, I am more concerned about your thoughts, Kimura. Kisuke crossed his arms and looked at Muyang in front of him with an unprecedentedly serious expression. My thoughts? Muyang looked at Kisuke's solemn eyes, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. I think it is time for us to settle accounts with Aizen. You mean our plan this time? No. Interrupting Kisuk's words and seeing the surprise on Kisuk's face, Muyang went on to say, "Pardon me for speaking bluntly, the possibility of success of this plan is not high." "Why?" "Aizen is hiding in Soul Society. With his identity as captain, I don't know how many things have been secretly done. In addition to his Zanpakuto ability, the possibility of defeating him with this plan is too low." Looking at Kisuk who pretended to be surprised in front of him, Muyang slightly curled his lips. "You don't have to pretend anymore. Don't you also not pin all your hopes on this plan?" Seeing that his mind was seen through by Muyang, Kisuk was not embarrassed at all. "Yes, this plan is just a test. We have to confirm it through some probing. After 100 years, what level has Aizen reached now? If his current strength is much stronger, I think he will not be stingy to show us his strength. On the contrary, if his strength is not strong enough to fight against us, he must not dare to act recklessly. We can still roughly speculate from his behavior what stage he has reached now, to prepare for the real decisive battle." "Well, that's correct, but after this matter, I will first find Aizen to settle a small account." "Are you in a hurry?" Hearing Muyang's words, Kisuk asked. "It doesn't matter. I have been preparing for 100 years. I don't want him to hold the initiative of the war in his hand. It is better to take the initiative. Moreover, with my ability, even if I am not his opponent, I can still easily leave." Taking a deep look at Muyang, Kisuk knew that Muyang was right, and such words were really beneficial. At least he could get some information about Aizen. "Well, since everything has been discussed, I will go back first." "What? It's rare for you to come here. Don't you want to eat here before leaving?" Seeing that Muyang was about to leave, Kisuk asked. "No need. I still have things to do in my shop. I'm not like you. I open a small shop and I need to make sure the operation is smooth." "Seriously, Kimura, it really hurts to hear you say that." "Kisuk, has no one ever told you?" Muyang looked at Kisuk who was waving his fan in front of him. This guy always looked like he was asking for a beating. "What's wrong?" He waved the paper fan in his hand, but Kisuk still had a coquettish look on his face. He completely did not notice the trace of wicked interest in Muyang's eyes when he spoke. "Your hat is lame." After saying this, Muyang pulled Suzuki Kusu over. Before Kisuk could react, his feet flashed and disappeared in front of him, leaving only a burst of evil laughter. After writing a letter and putting it on the table, Rukia carried her backpack and finally glanced at the room that she had stayed in for a few months. Rukia resolutely turned and jumped down from the window. She had also thought of the things that Muyang and the others had thought of. Soul Society must have found out about what had happened today, and the fact that she had secretly transmitted Shinigami's power to the human race must have been exposed. Soul Society would definitely not ignore such a thing. Before the people they had sent to capture her arrived, she must leave the house of Ichigo. She must not involve him in this. Rukia, who fled in a hurry, did not notice that in the sky behind her, two figures were standing there, and what she never expected was that in order to catch herself, Soul Society actually sent a captain and a vice-captain, such a luxurious lineup. And just as the door opened, Kuchiki Byakuya and Abarai Renji came to the modern world. Kisuk and Yoruchi noticed at the first time, and the people of Anding District also felt the two amazing Ryuryoku in a moment. This kind of Ryuryoku, Soul Society must be really mad. For Kuchiki Rukia, they actually sent out a captain and a vice-captain. When he felt the Ryuryoku, Muyang's eyebrow was raised and there's a smile on the corner of his mouth. Hirako Shinji asked with interest, "Kimura, do you know who these two groups of Ryuryoku are?" "Well, one of them is Byakuya." Muyang smiled even more. "Kuchiki Byakuya?" Seeing Muyang nod, Hiyori curled her lips and said, "What?" It turned out to be the stinky brat of the Kuchiki family. I didn't expect that after such a long time, this guy has become a vice-captain. Haha. Hearing Hiyori's words, Muyang finally could not help but laugh. Speaking of which, Hiyori, you have not seen the information we collected about Soul Society before, right? The current head of the Kuchiki family, Kuchiki Byakuya, has been promoted to captain decades ago. Huh? Hiyori opened his mouth wide and said in disbelief, that stinking brat has already become a captain? Or was it decades ago? Seeing everyone's speechless and disdainful eyes, Hiyori felt a little embarrassed. It seemed that she did not pay enough attention to these things. Kimura, don't you want to see your former student? A reunion after 100 years, that scene is touching. Hirako Shinji said to Muyang. See him. Hearing the words of Hirako Shinji, Muyang was slightly moved. He had not seen him for 100 years. For the students in the past, that proud Chinese cabbage, Muyang also had some longing in his heart. But after thinking about it, Muyang shook his head. Although Byakuya in the past was really proud and interesting, but after 100 years, Byakuya had become the emotionless boring person unlike the one that he was familiar with in the previous life. After all, he was now the head of the Kuchiki family and was no longer the child in the past. As the model of Shinigami, he regarded honor as the head of the Kuchiki family more important than his life. It's not necessary to see him. Now is not the time for us to show ourselves. What we need to do now is to hide ourselves and accumulate strength. I know. It's this sentence again. Speaking of which, we have been training all this time, and have no time to relax at all. Since you are not going, Kimura, come and help me train. I feel that my cutting skills are still a little flawed. Lisa closed the book and pushed up her glasses. Her expression was very serious. Although she was usually expressionless, her current behavior was much more serious than usual. Seeing Lisa so active, Shinji asked in confusion, why are you so active today? Didn't you say you weren't in a hurry 2 days ago? Even the little guy from back then became a captain. I don't have much time to relax now. Lisa stood up, took her sword, and led the way to the backyard. Seeing Lisa so serious, Muyang did not refuse. He raised his head and drank the contents of the cup. Then he stood up and followed Lisa to the backyard. As for the matter between Byakuya and Ichigo, he would leave it to Kisuke to handle. Although Muyang decided not to go to the scene to prevent any unforeseen events from happening, the unforeseen event he was worried about still happened. Retreat, Renji. Wait, Captain. I can still. Hearing the faint words of Kuchiki Byakuya. Abarai Renji looks tired and tattered, regardless of the blood left from his forehead. He looked at Kuchiki Byakuya excitedly and said, wanting to explain something. I said go back. In the face of Renji words, Kuchiki Byakuya just said with no expression, but this faint sentence made Renji suddenly close his mouth, and there was even a trace of fear on his face. Seeing Renji standing aside with his mouth closed, Kuchiki Byakuya turned his eyes to Kurosaki Ichigo. His eyes were dull, like looking at a dead person, and that kind of look made Kurosaki Ichigo feel a burst of discomfort in his heart. I have been very concerned since just now. Looking at the cautious teenager standing in front of him with a sword, Kuchiki Byakuya flatly opened his mouth, and there was no emotion fluctuation in his tone. Although the teenager in front of him burst out a strong Ryu-ryoku in the moment just now, that kind of rough spiritual force was not enough to attract his attention. As the captain of Gotei 13, as the head of Kuchiki family, the head of the 4 great nobles, he had enough confidence that human beings were human beings. Even if they were lucky to obtain Shinigami's strength, they were just human beings. Looking at the Shinigami in front of him who was full of a noble aura and handsome appearance, Kurosaki Ichigo's whole body tightened. Although he did not know how strong he was, just looking at the respectful attitude of the guy who was defeated by him, he could know a little. He was definitely a more terrible existence than the guy who had fought with him before. Hearing the guy in front of him speak, Kurosaki Ichigo's heart tightened a bit, holding his sword tightly in his palm and sweating slightly. What is the relationship between you and Shinigami, whose name is Muyang? Muyang? Kurosaki Ichigo was slightly stunned. He did not know what the guy in front of him meant. Why did he suddenly ask such a strange question when he was fighting? It seems that you don't know. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo's reaction, Kuchiki Byakuya shook his head in disappointment, closed his eyes, and said faintly. He originally thought that he could find information about Muyang from this boy. Although I don't know why you have such a powerful spirit force, but humans are humans. Even if you are lucky to obtain Shinigami's strength, it is only this level. Kuchiki Byakuya opened his eyes and put his hand on his Zanpakuto. Just a blur in front of his eyes, and even the figure was not caught. Kurosaki Ichigo felt a sharp pain suddenly coming from his body. How is this possible? Kurosaki Ichigo fell to the ground powerlessly. He felt blood continuously flowing out from his 2 wounds. Along with the blood, there was also his own strength and life. What's going on? Did I get slashed? I can't even tell if it came from the front or the back. It hurts. As expected, in the end, you are only at the level of a human. You're really slow. Even when you fell down, you're so slow. Kuchiki Byakuya sheathed his sword, his hands hanging down, and it could not be seen that he had just made a move. Brother Byakuya. Seeing Byakuya make a move, Rukia could not help but exclaim, and her tone was extremely anxious. Kuchiki Byakuya slightly turned his head and looked at Rukia, who was shouting, and there was no emotion in his eyes. I haven't seen it for a long time. He is indeed powerful. Abarai Renji, who was watching Kuchiki Byakuya, swallowed a mouthful of saliva and felt that his throat was a little dry. I can barely see his slash. The moment when he pulled out the sword, even the moment when he pulled back the sword, I can't see it. Abarai Renji clenched his fist and felt a sense of powerlessness in his heart. He was still too weak. Captain Kuchiki stood in front of him like a high mountain. When could he touch his back? Looking at Kurosaki Ichigo, who fell to the ground with pity, Abarai Renji could not tell what emotions were in his heart. I think that guy shouldn't even be able to figure out what happened, but, anyway, the Ryuryoku sent by that fellow just now. Recalling the Ryuryoku that Kurosaki Ichigo burst out in an instant before, Abarai Renji still felt a little difficult to let go of. What is it, Renji? Seeing that Abarai Renji's face was different, Kuchiki Byakuya asked. It's okay. For someone like him, there is no need for Captain to do it. I can do it myself. Seeing the awkward expression on Abarai Renji's face, Kuchiki Byakuya's eyes moved and turned slightly. Don't say that. If I always watch on the side, my skills will degenerate sooner or later. Pa! Just when Abarai Renji, Kuchiki Rukia and Kuchiki Byakuya were chatting, Kurosaki Ichigo, who had recovered some strength, suddenly reached out and grabbed Kuchiki Byakuya's clothes standing in front of him. I'm still alive. Raising his head and looking at the man standing in front of him, Kurosaki Ichigo had a smile on his face. Although the wound was still bleeding, and soon his life was coming to an end, but at this moment, he still had a smile on his face. Kuchiki Byakuya's eyes slightly slanted, looking at the teenager lying on the ground, the teenager who still had strength after being hit by himself. However, Kuchiki Byakuya narrowed his eyes and looked at the hand that grabbed his trousers, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Let me go. I can't hear you, look at me and talk. Feeling the feeling of superiority in Kuchiki Byakuya's tone, Kurosaki Ichigo grinned and said, the guy in front of him who ignored everything, the high and mighty tone really made him uncomfortable. Is that so? Kuchiki Byakuya slightly turned around and looked down at the little ghost on the ground. It seems that you don't want your hand. Hearing the chill in Kuchiki Byakuya's tone, Kuchiki Rukia's face changed, and there was danger. Rushing forward, before Kuchiki Byakuya started, he kicked Kurosaki Ichigo's hand away. All kinds of situations flashed in Rukia's brain, and what flashed in her mind was everything that happened during the past few months when she was protected. A strange feeling was brewing in her heart, and she almost couldn't help but shed tears. "You're just a human inferior existence, pulling my big brother's trousers is improper. Know your place." After roaring at Kurosaki Ichigo, Rukia turned to Kuchiki Byakuya and said faintly, "Let's go, big brother. The action of that guy just now made me completely awake. Please take me back to Soul Society. I will make up for the mistakes I have made." "Hey wait, what are you talking about?" Hearing Rukia words, Kurosaki Ichigo, who was lying on the ground, shouted. Bang! Stepping on Kurosaki Ichigo's head, Abarai Renji opened his mouth and said. "It's really a guy who does not admit defeat at the end of his life. Don't move anymore, just wait for death. No need to give him another stab. Even if he is left here, he will die sooner or later. Let's go, big brother." "Wait. Rukia. Are you serious? Look at me. Hey." Looking at Rukia, who turned away, Kurosaki Ichigo cried again. "Don't move." Rukia shouted loudly, her tone already carrying a trace of crying, but she was still stubbornly saying. "You just dare to move and look. If you dare to catch up, I will personally kill you. Since you are going to die sooner or later, why don't you lie there and rest for a while?" Looking at Rukia's eyes with tears and sad expression, Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes gradually dimmed. He finally recognized the cruel reality. Now he could do nothing but lie on the ground helplessly and watch everything happen. "I will not fight anymore." Kuchiki Byakuya held his sword in his hand and put it down. If he could, he did not want to treat Rukia like this, but as the head of the four great nobles, the head of Kuchiki family, all of Shinigami's expressions must be strictly followed by all of Shinigami's rules. The two swords have just completely destroyed the soul of Seketsu and Hakusui, and he will die in 1 hour at most. Even if he can survive, all the power will disappear. When the time comes, not to mention Shinigami's ability, even Ryoryoku will disappear. Kuchiki Byakuya said lightly, even disdained to look at Kurosaki Ichigo lying on the ground. "Renji." "Yes." Walking forward, Abarai Renji sheathed his sword and opened the door to Soul Society. "Can't make a sound, and can't move." Kurosaki Ichigo lay on the ground and looked at Kuchiki Rukia, who was taken away. His heart was full of bitterness, and he was saved by her again. Until they went to the realm gate and gradually disappeared. Kurosaki Ichigo, who had recovered some strength, punched the ground and made a humiliating roar. His voice was full of pain. That sense of powerlessness, he could only watch helplessly but could not do anything. The humiliation tortured his heart again and again. Under that feeling, even the pain in his body seemed insignificant. It was unknown when it began to rain. The merciless rain washed Kurosaki Ichigo's body, making his body, which had gradually become colder because of the injury, colder. His body temperature dropped gradually, and his life was gradually passing away. "My body is so heavy, so cold. Blood, flowing non-stop. I am going to die. Asterisk ta 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 asterisk." As the footsteps approached, Kurosaki Ichigo suddenly felt as if the rain had stopped, and then he fell into a coma. Walking up to Kurosaki Ichigo, Kisuk looked at Kurosaki Ichigo, who was lying on the ground, and there was an unknown emotion in his eyes. After simply treating the wounds on Kurosaki Ichigo's body and first resolving the bleeding situation, Kisuk turned to look at the other person lying on the ground, Ishida Yuri. "How is it? Do you want to take a rest at my place? Thank you for your kindness. But no, I'm fine. As for Ichigo, I'll leave him to you to take care of." Ishida Yuri clenched his fists and said with a bit of unwillingness in his tone, "Now, if there is anyone who can defeat them, it will not be me, but him. The only person who can save Kuchiki is him." Seeing the young man who said such words with a bit of unwillingness and humiliation, Kisuk was slightly silent. To let a proud young man say such words, how many setbacks and blows must he go through? I know, I will take good care of Kurosaki-san. Looking at the strong back of Ishida, Kisuke had mixed feelings in his heart. Kisuke bent over and carried the unconscious Kurosaki Ichigo on his back. His figure flashed and he quickly rushed to his house. With Kurosaki Ichigo's current condition, if he could not be treated as soon as possible, he might really die. Seriously, the holiday has just begun, and brother Ichigo haven't come back yet. At Kurosaki Ichigo's house, Karen, who was sitting at the table, complained softly. At this time, Kurosaki Ichigo was walking on the way to the Urahara shop. Last night, Kisuke had already made everything clear to him. Kisuke Urahara had a way to go to Soul Society, and if he wanted to go to Soul Society to save Rukia, he would have to receive 10 days of training under his hands. But he was just an ordinary person now and had lost Shinigami's strength. As Byakuya said, his Ryatsu had all been lost. Kurosaki Ichigo also felt it. Since he woke up last night, he could not see anything. The souls that were usually seen everywhere could not be seen. This kind of self, can he really successfully save Rukia? At this time, Kurosaki Ichigo has already passed the impulse at the beginning. He can now rationally analyze things. He doesn't feel that he can defeat the two Shinigami he met last night and save Rukia. What should he do? Various thoughts flashed through his mind. Unconsciously, Kurosaki Ichigo had come to the Kisuke shop. Please come with me, Kurosaki-san. Kurosaki Ichigo just arrived at the entrance of the Kisuke shop. Kisuke, who wore a green hat, had come up and took Kurosaki Ichigo to the shop. He uncovered a flat wooden board on the ground and revealed a vertical passage below. What is this? Looking at the dark passage, Kurosaki Ichigo asked curiously. It seemed to be a basement, but he had never seen anyone's basement go down vertically. Let's go. You will know when we go down. Kisuke smiled mysteriously and took Kurosaki Ichigo down the stairs. His eyes suddenly lit up. Kurosaki Ichigo looked at everything in front of him and could not hide the shock in his heart. He did not expect that there was such a place under the shop. Wow! What is this? There is such a huge hole in the ground of this shop. Just as Kurosaki Ichigo was amazed by the underground space, Kisuke suddenly shouted at this side. The huge and exaggerated sound rolled back and forth in the underground space, making Kurosaki Ichigo's ears numb. You are so noisy. You don't have to shout for me. Kurosaki Ichigo stretched out his little finger and dug into his ear. He said impatiently. Hurry up and start. Training or something. As you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, Kisuke suddenly stretched out his hand. The cane in his hand suddenly hit Kurosaki Ichigo's head, and then passed through his head, pushing his soul out of his body. Damn it, what's this? After being sent flying by Kisuke's sudden attack, Kurosaki Ichigo rolled a few times on the ground. After standing up, Kurosaki Ichigo covered his head and shouted at Kisuke with dissatisfaction. As soon as he finished speaking, Kurosaki Ichigo suddenly felt dizzy. Not only that, but even his body felt weak, and he could not even stand steadily. This is the first time you have escaped from your body in Shinigami's state. Do you feel very uncomfortable and difficult to breathe? You didn't expect to struggle with the posture of a soul, did you? The current you has been destroyed by Kuchiki Byakuya by the source of the spiritual power Hakusui and Seketsu. In other words, the current you is just an ordinary soul without spiritual power. If you want to fight with Shinigami, you must first start from recovering the lost spiritual power, otherwise there is nothing to talk about. First of all, you have to find a way to let your soul and body freely move. The so-called spiritual power is the power of something with a spirit. As long as the spiritual power is increased, it can make the soul and body have flexible movements. On the other hand, once the soul body can make movements that surpass the actual physical body, it represents the recovery of the spiritual power. Although that is the case, rather than saying it, it is better to start directly. Hey, are you ready? Kisuke turned his head and called out. Then, he saw Yururu walking over with a large pile of things in his arms. Nice to meet you. Yururu looked at Kurosaki Ichigo in front of him and said expressionlessly. First lesson, let's fight with her. Kisuke fanned himself and said to Kurosaki Ichigo. The rules are very simple. As long as there is one party that can no longer move, it will be the end. Before you are beaten by her, please make your move first. On the other side, under the threat of Kisuke, Kurosaki Ichigo was running around with a helmet on his head. On the other side, Yoruchi, who had turned into a black cat, also found Chad, who had just awakened his ability not long ago, and Orihime. Cat. Chad and Orihime looked at the black cat in front of them. Just now, the black cat suddenly ran in front of them and said that it wanted to take them for testing and training. Yes, if you want to go to Soul Society, you have to accept it. Do you want to accept it? But you suddenly said that. Looking at the black cat in front of him, Orihime was hesitant, obviously hesitant. Ichigo is ready to go to Soul Society. If you want to show your strength, then accept my training. Of course, whether you decide to go or not, you can slowly consider it. I want to go. Chad said without thinking. Since Ichigo wanted to go, how could he not go? He had made an agreement with Ichigo to fight for each other. That. Orihime was still a little hesitant. Although she wanted to save Kuchiki and wanted to be with Kurosaki, she could not help but feel a little uneasy when she thought of fighting. I won't force you. Seeing Black Cat's eyes, Orihime gradually calmed down and nodded with a smile. At that moment, she had made her decision. She wanted to go with Kurosaki to the place called Soul Society to save Kuchiki Rukia. Under a waterfall. Ishida Yuri was also busy with his cultivation. Putting down his luggage and looking at the flowing water, Ishida Yuri felt a sense of shame in his heart for his weakness. As the last Quincy, he did not protect the glory of the Quincy and was defeated by Shinigami. That sense of powerlessness was something he could never forget. Similarly, he could not forgive such a weak self. Clenching his fist, Ishida Yuri looked at the small box on the ground. His eyes flashed a touch of firmness. Next time, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely not be so weak anymore. He bet on his glory as a Quincy. What's wrong? What are you going to do so early in the morning? Hearing the voice behind him, Muyang tidied up his clothes and replied without looking back, go to Kisuke's place to take a look. Are you still worried? It's not that I am worried. Since there is Kisuke, there is nothing to be worried about. It's just that Kisuke's ability is not suitable for helping people train. Moreover, he does not have much experience in this field. After thinking about it, it is better for me to go over and take a look. Then our side. Same as before. Muyang turned around and said to Suzuki Kusu, there is no need to specially prepare anything. Now is not the time for us to appear. We just need to lurk and wait for the opportunity. I know. Well, it's okay then. I'm leaving. He patted Suzuki Kusu on the shoulder, then his figure flashed, and the next moment, Muyang had appeared at the door of the Urahara shop. Really, is there no one to welcome me? Seeing the closed door and the empty shop, Muyang muttered softly. In Muyang's eyes, the periphery of the shop in front of him was surrounded by a barrier that ordinary people could not see. If he was ordinary person, he would not be able to get close to this place. As long as they got close to this side, the barrier on the periphery would give them a hint and then leave here for various reasons. Raising his feet, this kind of barrier naturally wouldn't have any effect on Muyang. However, Muyang didn't have any thoughts of forcibly breaking it. Instead, he directly walked over and directly passed through the barrier. Presumably, this barrier was set up by the Tsukabashi Tensai. In addition to guarding against ordinary people and preventing them from coming here by mistake, it also had a vigilant role and a little defensive role. N. Sure enough, just as Muyang crossed the barrier, Tsukabashi Tessai in the underground training ground suddenly changed his expression. The moment Muyang passed through the barrier, he felt that someone had passed through his barrier. What's wrong, Tessai? Seeing the change in expression on Tsukabashi Tessai, Jinta looked up in confusion. Someone passed through my barrier. Tsukabashi Tessai said in a deep voice. Hearing his answer, Jinta and Yururu looked over in surprise. There was actually someone in the modern world who could break through Tessai's barrier. Is it Kimura? Tsukabashi Tessai closed his eyes and thought for a moment. Then, he said with uncertainty. The person who came slipped through his barrier effortlessly. Even if he had just passed through his barrier, he could not accurately determine the identity of the person. However, from the feeling, it should be Muyang. Oh, we meet again, Tessai. Just as Tsukabashi Tessai was still guessing, a voice came from in front of him. Looking at it, he did not know when, but Muyang had already arrived in front of him and was greeting him with a smile on his face. So it really is you, Kimura-san. Looking at Muyang in front of him, Tsukabashi Tessai politely bowed. You. Seeing Muyang in front of him, Jinta suddenly gritted his teeth and said with a look of indignation on his face, as if he had a deep grudge with Muyang. Isn't this legendary young master Jinta? Why does he look so angry? Hearing Muyang call him young master Jinta, Jinta's face turned red. After all, he was still a child. It was inevitable that he was a little embarrassed to be praised like this. In the end, he could only rub his head awkwardly and smile at Muyang. Seeing Jinta like this, Muyang turned to look at the other side. He just happened to see Kisuke waving his hand and following behind Kurosaki Ichigo. As for Kurosaki Ichigo, he could only flee in a sorry state under the chase of Kisuke. However, even so, he was still beaten up badly by Kisuke. This is simply bullying. After watching for a while, Muyang turned his head and said to the three of them. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo who was abused by Kisuke on the field, Muyang felt that he could not bear to watch anymore. It was really too miserable. It was completely a one-sided bullying. Just as Muyang sighed with emotion, Kurosaki Ichigo, who was being chased by Kisuke, suddenly stopped. Kisuke, who had been chasing him, also stopped. He looked at Kurosaki Ichigo who had stopped in front of him with some expectation in his eyes. At this time, Muyang and Tessai were also keenly aware of what happened to Kurosaki Ichigo. There was a slight change in his aura. A bright light flashed in the eyes of Tessai, and Muyang also showed some interest in his eyes. Hey, what's wrong? Why did the two of them stop? Hiding behind a stone, Jinta looked at the two people who suddenly stopped not far away and asked in confusion. Just as Jinta finished speaking, Kurosaki Ichigo, who had been abused before, suddenly shook his body. He put sword, who only had the hilt left in his hand, at his waist, and put on a posture of holding the sword at his waist, and was ready to pull out the knife. Following Kurosaki Ichigo's posture, a burst of Ryuryoku suddenly erupted from his body. Waves of air blew away everything around him, causing Jinta, Yururu, and the others who were hiding behind him to feel a wave of shock. Zangetsu! Kurosaki Ichigo shouted. He raised his hand, and a condensed blue Ryuryoku shot out from his hand. A powerful Ryuryoku instantly filled the entire underground space. Hoo! The dust on the ground was lifted up by Kurosaki Ichigo's slash. Tsukabashi Tessai hurriedly turned around and blocked Jinta and Yururu behind him to prevent them from getting injured because of the scattered stones. There is no need for this. Seeing that Tsukabashi Tessai was carefully protecting Jinta and Yururu, Muyang said indifferently. He did not make any movements, but the dust that rose because of Kurosaki Ichigo's attack had disappeared before it reached Muyang. So powerful. Looking at Muyang who easily resolved everything, Jinta couldn't help but exclaim. As the dust settled, Kisuke covered his hat with one hand and looked at Kurosaki Ichigo, who had become a little different. What's wrong with this zanpakuto? I can't see the hilt and the hand guard at all. The shape of the entire blade is quite incomplete. Looking at zanpakuto in Kurosaki Ichigo's hand, the three people on the side said. In comparison, the saber from before is still better. Indeed, the zanpakuto in Kurosaki Ichigo's hand at this time really did not meet the standards of a normal person. Without a hand guard, the hilt could not be seen. The blade was in the shape of a huge kitchen knife. It was completely different from the ordinary zanpakuto. Since your zanpakuto has appeared, let's officially enter the third test. Kisuke interrupted Kurosaki Ichigo, who was still sizing up zanpakuto in his hand. He extended his hand and said to Kurosaki Ichigo. Sorry, Mr. Kisuke, you have to hide well. I think I won't go easy. Hearing Kisuke's words, Kurosaki Ichigo took back his eyes to look at his zanpakuto. He waved it in his hand, and his eyes were full of determination to look at Kisuke in front of him. What? Hearing Kurosaki Ichigo's words, Kisuke was slightly stunned. This kid really dared to say. Just at this moment, Kurosaki Ichigo's body shook, and the thing stuck in his body was instantly shattered. A stronger Ryuryoku suddenly rose from his body. Feeling Ryuryoku burst out from Kurosaki Ichigo's body, Kisuke's expression changed slightly. This kind of strength. Sing, Benihime. A red barrier suddenly appeared in front of Kisuke. At the same time, a powerful slash shot out from Kurosaki Ichigo's zanpakuto and crashed into the red barrier in front of Kisuke. Boom! A terrifying wave of air came from the other side. The shockwaves caused by Ryuryoku's violent collision even caused Muyang to feel a trace of fear. It was just that he had just recovered Shinigami's strength, yet he was able to immediately unleash such a powerful slash. He was truly worthy of being the main character. If not for the Benihime, I think I would have lost an arm. Looking at the shattered red crystal wall in front of him, Kisuke sighed. Really, even my hat was knocked off, but I didn't expect that your power is so amazing with just one swing. Kurosaki-san, you are really a terrible little devil, and you passed the third test. Bending down, he picked up his hat, patted it and put it on his head again. Kisuke looked at Kurosaki Ichigo, who had fallen asleep on the opposite side of him, and his tone was full of satisfaction. In this way, the possibility of the plan succeeding was also much higher. I say, Kisuke, that hat is broken like this and you still have to continue to wear it. Are you so fond of this green hat? Oh, isn't this Kimura-san? As if he had just seen Muyang, Kisuke stepped forward and gave him a big hug. Then he took a few steps back and looked at Muyang and asked, So, Kimura-san, what are you here for? Nothing, I just came to see the progress on your side. Now it seems that it is not bad. You are talking about Kurosaki-san, I did not expect that he could burst out such strength in an instant. It seems that our previous evaluation of him was too low. How about it, can I ask you to do the next training? Kisuke looked at Muyang seriously and asked in a low voice. Of course. Muyang grinned. Otherwise, what do you think I'm here for? Don't worry, I will teach this kid well. Seeing the meaningful smile on Muyang's lips, Kisuke looked at Kurosaki Ichigo, who was sleeping soundly, as if he was looking at the misfortune he was about to encounter. Urahara-san, you want me to fight with this guy? Carrying his huge zanpakuto on his shoulder, Kurosaki Ichigo looked at Muyang with eyes full of suspicion. However, although he said that, the guy in front of him looked a little familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. Kurosaki Ichigo reached out a hand and scratched his head. He looked at Muyang in front of him and thought. However, he did not care about other things. How could he remember the boss of this coffee shop? If it was Suzuki Kusu and Harabel, Kurosaki Ichigo would naturally have an impression. However, the other party was Muyang. He could not remember. Hey, Kimura, you've been looked down on. Kisuke looked at the indifferent Muyang and smiled. Even in the past, Soul Society had never seen anyone look down on Muyang like this. He did not expect to be looked down upon by a rookie like Kurosaki Ichigo in the modern world. With a faint smile, Muyang ignored Kisuk's teasing and turned to look at Kurosaki Ichigo in front of him. "Kid, if you don't mind, you can talk big after you defeat me." "Ah dash. A guy like you." Although he knew that Kisuk would not do meaningless things, the guy in front of him did not look like a powerful character no matter how he looked at it. It was really difficult for Kurosaki Ichigo to treat him as a powerful enemy. "My name is Muyang. Please advise me." Looking at Kurosaki Ichigo in front of him, Muyang's lips curled into a smile. The feeling of violently abusing the protagonist should be good. Seeing the formal appearance of Muyang, Kurosaki Ichigo felt a bit awkward. In the past, he would always directly rush up when he fought with others. How could there be any formal opening remarks? Moreover, the name Muyang made him feel a sense of familiarity, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Not only that, this name seemed to be a relatively important name. It was just that Kurosaki Ichigo really could not remember it. However, if he could not understand something, he would not think about it. Kurosaki Ichigo had always been like this. "I am Kurosaki Ichigo. Although I do not know the meaning of Urahara-san doing this, I will cut you down." He raised his Zanpakuto. Kurosaki Ichigo said firmly. From Kisuk, he had learned the most important thing in battle: the determination to kill people. Good eyesight. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo's determined eyes, Muyang praised. This realization was really precious, especially for a 15-year-old child. Seeing the emotion in Muyang's eyes, Kurosaki Ichigo instinctively felt a burst of displeasure in his heart. The man in front of him looked to be only in his 20s, but he just looked at him as if he was looking at a child. This kind of gaze made the teenager who was in his puberty feel unhappy. 15 years old was the age where he yearned to be recognized by others. His head felt hot. Kurosaki Ichigo kicked hard. The ground under his feet was instantly crushed by Kurosaki Ichigo, leaving only a pile of gravel. His body suddenly rushed forward. In just a blink of an eye, Kurosaki Ichigo had already appeared in front of Muyang. He held his Zanpakuto with both hands and chopped down at Muyang's head. Zanpakuto in his hand turned into a white light and instantly stuck to Muyang's forehead. However, at this moment, Kurosaki Ichigo suddenly felt a trace of regret in his heart. He was too reckless. Because in Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes, this person in front of him seemed to be scared silly by him. Facing his Zanpakuto, he did not even have a reaction. Just as Kurosaki Ichigo was regretting in his heart, just as his Zanpakuto's blade was about to cut the person in front of him into two pieces, Kurosaki Ichigo saw a figure flash in front of him. That person had already disappeared from his eyes, and he did not even catch a trace of movement. Boom! Kurosaki Ichigo's Zanpakuto struck the ground, leaving a huge hole in the ground. Looking at the damage caused by his attack, Kurosaki Ichigo did not feel the least bit complacent. Instead, he stood up with a cautious face and assumed a defensive posture. What a wise judgment. Muyang stood not far away. He looked at Kurosaki Ichigo, who was quickly putting on a defensive posture. His eyes revealed a touch of satisfaction. Although he had not experienced much actual combat, Kurosaki Ichigo seemed to be born for battle. As long as he was in battle, he could grow rapidly. As long as he continued to fight, he would soon become a powerful Shinigami. Shinigami, who could rival the captain. In the original work, Kurosaki Ichigo was like this. Whether it was becoming Shinigami, learning Bankai, learning holification, Kurosaki Ichigo's growth was quickly completed in battle time and time again. Only fighting was the fastest way for him to grow. Similarly, not only Kurosaki Ichigo, everyone was like this. Only fighting was the fastest way to grow. Only through fighting, one's strength would get true growth. Although cultivation would make people stronger, only in actual combat could one's strength really burst out. In the original work, Shinigami who had cultivated for decades and hundreds of years, the strength amplification was almost imperceptible. After Kurosaki Ichigo appeared, after the plot began, each and every one of them quickly improved in strength in a short period of time. It was like a day, like a cheat, only making people call it unscientific. The rapid improvement of their strength seemed unscientific, but in fact, the decades and hundreds of years of cultivation that Shinigami had experienced in Soul Society, each and every one of them had a deep precipitation, but they lacked an opportunity, and the series of battles that the protagonist appeared after was that opportunity. Through one life and death battle after another, they kept cultivating for more than several years, and the profound knowledge that had settled down were all fermented in battles, so the strength would have a blowout period. It seemed that their strength was extremely unscientific in a short period of time. In fact, that was the result of their hundreds of years of experience. In particular, Rukia and Renji, the improvement of strength was even faster. Of course, there was a reason for the influence of Kurosaki Ichigo's protagonist aura, but more because they were following Kurosaki Ichigo around, experienced more life and death battles, and their strength came from their own fighting savings. As for Kurosaki Ichigo, although he did not have decades or hundreds of years of savings, he had talent that no one could compare with, and now what Muyang had to do was to let Kurosaki Ichigo experience enough battles in a short period of 10 days, turning his talent into real strength. Hearing Muyang's praise for himself, Kurosaki Ichigo's face was heavy. Through the previous moment, Kurosaki Ichigo already knew that the seemingly harmless guy in front of him was really a guy more terrible than Kisuke. At least Kisuke was strong, but he could still see his movements. As for the guy in front of him, he could not even catch a trace of his movement, just like that night facing Rukia's brother. Wait. Thinking of Rukia's brother, Kurosaki Ichigo suddenly thought of something. In his impression, he seemed to have mentioned a person's name before he started. What is the relationship between you and Shinigami, whose name is Muyang? Thinking back to what the stinky guy said to him that night, Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes suddenly widened. The guy in front of him. Being distracted in battle is not a good habit. Seeing that Kurosaki Ichigo was actually distracted in the battle with him, Muyang said with dissatisfaction. Even when he fought with Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai back then, he was not looked down on like this. Kurosaki Ichigo was really annoying. I remember now. I remember who you are. Hearing Muyang's words, Kurosaki Ichigo did not respond. Instead, he pointed at him and shouted. The expression on his face was very strange, with some surprise, some anger, and curiosity. Oh, I remember it. Muyang only thought that Kurosaki Ichigo remembered that he was the boss of the Anding district. After all, Kurosaki Ichigo had been there several times. Although he had not communicated with them, he should still have some impression. Unexpectedly, Kurosaki Ichigo's next sentence surprised him. I heard Rukia's stinky brother mention your name that night. Oh. Hearing Kurosaki Ichigo's words, Muyang was slightly stunned. Why did Byakuya mention his name to Kurosaki Ichigo? It seems that you two know each other. Seeing the expression on Muyang's face, Kurosaki Ichigo said. Then, he looked at Muyang with an indignant expression and asked, who exactly are you? Why do you know that guy? Could it be that you are also sent by Soul Society? You are. Urahara-san, why did you hit me? Kurosaki Ichigo covered his head and looked at Kisuke with dissatisfaction. He said it well, but who knew that Kisuke would suddenly come up and hit his head? That is all in the past. Don't ask about it. When you know it, you will naturally know. What you have to do now is to accept Kimura's training. Seeing that Kurosaki Ichigo wanted to say more, Kisuke suddenly turned and walked away, only a sentence came over. By the way, I will reveal a little bit to you. That night, the one who beat you to the ground was called Kuchiki Byakuya, the current captain of 6th Division of Gotei 13. Hearing Kisuke's words, Kurosaki Ichigo was shocked. Before, Kisuke had roughly told him about the structure of Godai 13. He also knew what the captain meant. He was one of the 13 strongest people standing at the top of Siriidai. As for the person in front of you, he was the teacher of Kuchiki Byakuya. What? Kurosaki Ichigo looked at Muyang, who was not far away, in shock. He was Kuchiki Byakuya's teacher. Although he had regained Shinigami's ability and was much stronger than before, but as long as he remembered that night he was defeated without any resistance, Kurosaki Ichigo could not help but feel a little depressed. Even if he compared it with his current level, Kuchiki Byakuya was still so strong. Kuchiki Byakuya was already so strong, so how strong was Muyang as his teacher? At this moment, there was no longer any contempt in Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes as he looked at Muyang. This guy was definitely the strongest opponent he had ever met. Incoming. Be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, Muyang tapped his feet and his body floated towards Kurosaki Ichigo as if he had no weight at all. Although he did not have any momentum, it made Kurosaki Ichigo's expression change greatly. This was because the speed of Muyang's movement was too fast. He only had time to block Muyang's attack using his Zanpakuto in front of his chest, and Muyang had already arrived in front of Kurosaki Ichigo. He waved his hand and the Zanpakuto in his hand slashed down at Kurosaki Ichigo. There was no time to dodge. Kurosaki Ichigo turned his hand and used his Zanpakuto to block in front of him. However, just as he came into contact with Muyang's Zanpakuto, Kurosaki Ichigo felt a powerful force coming from his own Zanpakuto. The arm holding the saber could not help but tremble. Even his leg softened slightly. The power of this attack was too strong. Only this level is not enough. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo struggling, Muyang smiled and said maliciously. He had not forgotten the matter of being looked down upon by this kid before. As he spoke, Muyang did not stop his movements. He slightly exerted force on his wrist and Kurosaki Ichigo felt an even stronger force coming from his Zanpakuto. Ah! With a loud shout, Kurosaki Ichigo struggled to shake off Muyang's Zanpakuto, but his body was also forced back several steps before he could stabilize himself. What great power! Looking up at Muyang, Kurosaki Ichigo was secretly amazed. That guy clearly didn't look strong at all. Who knew that his strength would be so great? His palm was still faintly aching. On the other side, Kurosaki Ichigo was still shocked by Muyang's strength. On the other side, Muyang had already rushed up. It was still the same light but incomparably swift movement method. In just a blink of an eye, Muyang had already appeared in front of Kurosaki Ichigo. The Zanpakuto in his hand slashed down again. Kurosaki Ichigo only had time to barely resist before he was sent flying by the force coming from Zanpakuto. This won't do. It's too much of a difference. Seeing that Kurosaki Ichigo had been sent flying again by him, Muyang shook his head and said. If this continued, there would be no effect of training at all. Perhaps he would even beat Kurosaki Ichigo until he lost confidence. If that happened, it would be a waste of time. Damn it! Kurosaki Ichigo got up from the ground and looked at Muyang, who was not far away. A sense of defeat rose in his heart. Was such a guy really someone he could defeat? Originally, with Kurosaki Ichigo's firm and tenacious belief, he would not easily have such a thought. However, the pressure that Muyang gave him was too great. That overwhelming strength made him unable to raise the belief of resistance. But, in his mind, how could he give up just because of a little setback? No matter what difficulties were waiting for him in front of him, he must save Rukia. Anyone that stood in his way must be defeated one by one. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Ichigo raised his Zanpakuto. The two blue flames in his eyes jumped, and a powerful Ryoryoku rose from his body. Fourth seat, third seat, vice captain. In the blink of an eye, Kurosaki Ichigo's Ryoryoku had already reached the peak of the vice captain, almost comparable to the captain. With the eruption of Kurosaki Ichigo's Ryuryoku, his Zanpakuto was wrapped in a layer of blue color. The surrounding gravel was shaken by Ryuryoku, and floated around him. There seemed to be a powerful aura around him. His eyes suddenly turned to Muyang, and with a shout, the Zanpakuto in Kurosaki Ichigo's hand suddenly chopped down. Getsuga Tensho. As Kurosaki Ichigo and Zanpakuto slashed, a blue-colored crescent-shaped slash came out of his Zanpakuto, and shot towards Kimura Muyang with a huge momentum. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo swing out his saber and execute his signature move, Kimura Muyang narrowed his eyes. Not to mention the power or anything, the appearance of this move is at least very good. Without seeing Muyang make any moves, his Zanpakuto was instantly covered with a layer of blue-colored spiritual pressure. With a flick of his arm, Kimura Muyang's Zanpakuto directly met Kurosaki Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho. Boom! A dazzling light exploded in front of Muyang. Waves of Ryuryoku came from the other side, forcing Kisuke and the others, who were watching the battle not far away, to stand behind the rock and hide. What a powerful slash! The smoke gradually dissipated, and from there came out Kimura Muyang, who had blocked Kurosaki Ichigo's blow. At this time, he still looked calm, not to mention injury, and he didn't even have dust on his body. What? Seeing that Muyang, who had taken a hit from him, was not injured at all, Kurosaki Ichigo cried out in disbelief. Originally, he felt that he was strong enough, but who knew that his strongest move actually did not hurt his opponent in the slightest. Muyang swung his arm. The attack just now was really not bad. With Kurosaki Ichigo who had reached the peak of the vice-captain level, the power of the attack had actually reached the level of the captain. No wonder Kurosaki Ichigo relied on this move from beginning to end in the original work. Seeing that his attack did not work, Kurosaki Ichigo did not hesitate at all. He stepped forward and suddenly rushed forward. The Zanpakuto in his hand slashed down on Muyang's head. After a few exchanges just now, Kurosaki Ichigo understood that there was no need for him to hold back against this guy in front of him. Even if he tried his best, it would be very difficult to cause any harm to him. It was completely unnecessary to hold back. Dang! With a wave of his arm, Muyang easily blocked the attack from Kurosaki Ichigo. Perhaps in a few months, Kurosaki Ichigo would indeed have the strength to fight the captain head-on. However, he was still too weak now, especially for Muyang, whose strength far surpassed that of an ordinary captain. Tilting his body to the side, Muyang turned his wrist and pressed down on the back of Kurosaki Ichigo's sword. Kurosaki Ichigo's body suddenly leaned forward uncontrollably, while Zanpakuto in Muyang's hand continued to slice towards his head. The blade in his eyes grew bigger and bigger, and Kurosaki Ichigo's pupils contracted slightly. He had no doubt that as long as he was hit by that blade, there was absolutely no chance of survival. Crap, I can't avoid it. This thought flashed through Kurosaki Ichigo's mind, but then it was suppressed by an even stronger will. No matter what, he had to live. He had already decided that he had to go to Soul Society to save Rukia. Just as the will in Kurosaki Ichigo's heart suddenly burst forth, a force suddenly burst out from his body. Kurosaki Ichigo only felt that the speed of the blade in front of him suddenly slowed down. He didn't have time to think about it, and Kurosaki Ichigo's body almost leaned back in reverse. Just as his head fell back, Kurosaki Ichigo felt a cold blade brush past his nose, brushing past the hair on his forehead. A few strands of hair floated down from his head and landed on his face. His body rolled and left Muyang's side. Kurosaki Ichigo didn't have time to steady himself and immediately moved a few steps to the side. Then he looked at Muyang and touched the strands of hair left on his face. Kurosaki Ichigo scolded Muyang. "Bastard! Do you really want to kill me?" After he finished speaking, he saw the faint smile on Muyang's face. Kurosaki Ichigo couldn't help but jump up and shout in disbelief, "You really want to kill me? But aren't you still fine?" Muyang looked at the flustered and exasperated Kurosaki Ichigo and lazily said, Bastard, you still dare to say it. If I hadn't reacted quickly just now, I might have really been killed by you. If you really are only at this level, you deserve to be killed. Nanny. Hearing Muyang's words, Kurosaki Ichigo was slightly stunned. Was this guy serious? If you are at this level, even if you go to Soul Society, you will only be courting death. It is better to die here. Bastard. You. Seeing that Kurosaki Ichigo was still talking, Muyang continued, do you think your current strength is strong enough? There is one thing I forgot to tell you. When the captain and vice-captain of Godei 13 come to the modern realm, in order to not affect the souls of the modern realm, their Ryoryoku will be restricted to 20%. Can you understand what I said? Hearing Muyang's words, Kurosaki Ichigo's pupils couldn't help but contract. The strength that the two of them displayed that day was only 20% of their usual strength. Seeing Kurosaki Ichigo's contracted pupils, Muyang smiled slightly. It seems that you understand. If you don't want to be killed after Soul Society, then fight with your life on the line right now. Also, don't think that this is just training. If you aren't careful, you will also die. Raising the Zanpakuto in his hand, Muyang's expression at this moment seemed slightly ferocious in Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes. Kurosaki-kun. Ah. Kisuke Urahara said that the person who will go with me to Soul Society will not be you. Ichigo Kurosaki looked at Orihime Inoue with a surprised expression. Although she didn't want to say that, is Inoue really suitable for such a thing? I always felt that she should be the kind of princess who was protected. As if she had sensed Kurosaki Ichigo's intention, Orihime was a little depressed. However, she was originally an optimist, but in a flash, she regained her usual liveliness. Not only me, but also Chad will go with us. We have been receiving Mr. Yoroiki's training all this time. Chad, is he going too? Yes. A low voice sounded behind Kurosaki Ichigo. Kurosaki Ichigo turned to look. That strong body was his good brother, Chad Yasutora. Chad. Hearing Kurosaki Ichigo's greeting, Chad Yasutora nodded and gave Kurosaki Ichigo a thumbs up to express his attitude. Seeing Chad Yasutora give him a thumbs up, Kurosaki Ichigo's face darkened. Could he not use such an old-fashioned gesture? Is there anyone else? Tell me, don't tell me even Tatsuki and Kigo are going. No, Tatsuki and the others don't want to go, but Ishida should be going with us. I heard Miss Yoruchi say that Ishida is working hard to train. Ishida, he should not come. He is the most complicated person in our group. The more complicated a person is, the more fragile he is. He is such a person. I think he should be the weakest among us. If he doesn't come, maybe it will be better. Chad said in a low voice. Although he looked rough on the outside, he had a more delicate heart than ordinary people. But who are you saying won't come? Just as Chad finished speaking, Ishida Yuri's voice sounded from behind him. He was wearing a white robe. There was even a small shawl on his shoulder, and Ishida Yuri's dress made Kurosaki Ichigo slightly stunned. Didn't I say it before? I can't forgive myself for being defeated by those Shinigami, so I want to cultivate. Since I said it, I must win until I win. For this, I am willing to go anywhere. Ishida Yuri turned his eyes to Kurosaki Ichigo, and his eyes were full of fighting spirit. It was the friendship between opponents, or perhaps it could also be called a foundation. Ishida, you. Kurosaki Ichigo stared blankly at Ishida Yuri, as if he was shocked by his words. You walked all the way here wearing such strange clothes. You really have guts. How can you say that it is very strange? Hearing Kurosaki Ichigo's ridicule of his battle uniform, Ishida Yuri immediately complained in dissatisfaction. Just as they were making noise here, the door of the Urahara shop suddenly opened. Kisuke came out and looked at the four energetic people here, with a smile on his face. Since everyone is here, come in with me. I will explain it to you when we get inside. The method to reach Soul Society. Please listen carefully, otherwise, you might not reach Soul Society. You will die. Hearing Kisuk's words, the four people outside became a little serious, silently following behind Kisuk, through the stairs to the underground training ground under their shop. How spectacular! I didn't expect that there would be such a spacious space underground. It's so cool, like a secret base. Your reaction is really great. I'm really moved. Hearing the cry of Orihime Inoue, the Tensei immediately held her hand with excitement and said. It was obvious that he was very grateful to Orihime, who recognized the results of his labor. Hee, it's nothing. Orihime scratched her head in embarrassment. I say, Kisuk, you should start quickly. Mr. Kimura, why are you here? Hearing the familiar voice, Orihime turned his head to the side and said in surprise. Long time no see, Orihime. I haven't seen you go to my place to play for a long time. We have been busy recently, so we don't have time to go to your place, Mr. Kimura. Hearing Muyang's words, Orihime scratched her head in embarrassment and then looked at Muyang as if she suddenly remembered something. By the way, Mr. Kimura, why are you here? Just as Orihime and Muyang were chatting happily, Kurosaki Ichigo finally could not help but ask. Inoue, how did you know him? Upon hearing Kurosaki Ichigo's question, Orihime turned to look at him in confusion. Mr. Kimura is the boss of the Anding district, don't we often go there to play? We all know each other. Isn't that right, Chad? Kurosaki Ichigo turned to look at Chad Yasutora. Yes. Nodding at Kurosaki Ichigo, Chad Yasutora then turned to look at Muyang. Long time no see, Mr. Kimura. Long time no see, Chad. You all know him. Seeing that Chad Yasutora and Orihime really knew Muyang, Kurosaki Ichigo cried out involuntarily. Hey, how can you say that? Kurosaki. I don't know him either. Ishida Yuri pushed up his glasses and said to Kurosaki Ichigo with dissatisfaction. Why did he feel that he was rejected? But, I didn't expect that Mr. Kimura is not an ordinary person either. Chad Yasutora looked at Muyang and said in a deep voice. There was nothing before, but now, whether it was Muyang or the calm zone, it seemed to be full of mysteries. Chad Yasutora's intuition told him that there was a secret hidden behind it. Well. If you have something to say, you should put it down first. Now look at me. Seeing that the other side seemed to be talking non-stop, Kisuk clapped his hands, attracting everyone's attention. Then he waved his arm, and a square door frame appeared beside him. I say Kisuk, can't you put in a little more effort? This door is too broken. It doesn't fit the design of aesthetics at all. Seeing the broken door summoned by Kisuk, Muyang couldn't help but complain. The door covered with tape looked like it had been dug out from a garbage dump. Hearing Muyang's words, Kurosaki Ichigo and the others also noticed the things on the door. It was just as Muyang had said. It was tattered, as if it had been dug out from a garbage dump. Was that thing really useful? Kurosaki Ichigo and the others couldn't help but have some faint doubts in their hearts. If this thing was useless, wouldn't they just die for no reason? Seeing the doubt in the eyes of Kurosaki Ichigo and the others, Kisuk's face was also a little embarrassed. This was something that he had been busy for several days to make. They were actually looking at it with a suspicious look. It was simply not giving him face. Cough cough. Kisuk coughed a few times. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Kisuk raised a finger and said. Don't underestimate this door. It was installed with a erasure converter above the gate and fixed with a combination talisman. Although it doesn't look good, it is real high-tech. Erasure converter. Hearing the new term that Kisuk spat out, Ishida Yuri was puzzled. Yes, as you said, Soul Society is the hometown of the soul. If you want to enter, you have to turn into a soul. But as you know, the only one who can move in the form of a soul is Shinigami, Kurosaki. Others will still be locked by the chain of causality even if their souls leave their bodies. Not to mention soul society, even moving is difficult. Therefore, we need the Ratio converter. This thing is the material that makes up all the substances in the modern world. It is the main material that is transformed into the soul Ratio. In other words, there is no need to let the soul leave. As long as you pass through this door, you can use your original appearance and enter soul society in the form of a soul. Then let's go now. A hit on Kurosaki Ichigo's waist and interrupted his words. Kisuke then said to them with a serious face, next is the theme. The key to the problem is the time. There is only 4 minutes to open the door to soul society. Once the time is over, the door will close, and you will be forever locked in the gap between the modern world and soul society. In addition, in the Dangai, in order to prevent the invasion of other creatures, it was street sweeper Tatsu, you can't beat M. Then what should we do? Hearing Kisuke's words, Oriheim, who was already relatively weak, wavered. Of course, it is to advance. Yoruchi walked in front of them. Didn't I say that the heart and soul are connected? What is important is what you think in your heart. It is the will that keeps going forward. Let me be responsible for the guidance. Don't be confused, don't be afraid, don't stop walking, don't look back, don't think about the things left behind, just keep going forward. If you can do this, then follow me. That goes without saying. At this time, the people gathered here have already made up their minds. You should be clear, little brat. If you lose, you won't be able to return. Of course you have to win. Well said. Feeling Kurosaki Ichigo and the others' unwavering conviction, Yoruchi praised. Are you ready? The moment I open the door, you will rush in. Everyone, go. In a dazzling light, Kurosaki Ichigo and the others rushed into the realm gate. P.S. Speaking of which, do the original plot and theater version of the animation still have to be written? Kurosaki Ichigo and the others entered through the gate in a flash of light, but Kisuke still stood in place and looked at the gate in front of him, his eyes revealing some unknown meaning. Don't worry, they will deal with it. Muyang walked forward and patted Kisuke on the shoulder to comfort him, and even if you don't trust them, don't you still have Yoruchi with them? Although she usually likes to make trouble, she can still be at ease in this kind of thing. How can it be? Kisuke shook his hand, and a small paper fan appeared in his hand, covering his chin. Kisuke said in an exaggerated tone, sounding as annoying as ever, I am just amazed by my skills. The corners of Muyang's mouth twitched slightly. This guy. You are hopeless. The shy boy from back then is no longer there. Ayaya, Kimura, how can you say that? I'm really sad. Looking at Kisuke's annoying face, Muyang was really powerless to complain. He turned around, not looking at Kisuke's face. Muyang was afraid that he would not be able to resist and punch him. Forget it, forget it. That's it. I'll go first. Oh, Kimura, if it's convenient, can you tell me your next move? Kisuke looked at the back of Muyang, the laughter in his tone restrained and was replaced with seriousness. I don't have a plan for the time being, but I should go back and sleep first. I am also very tired during this period of time. Then, I will probably meet my old friends whom I haven't seen for a long time. Muyang replied without turning his head. Then, his body flashed and disappeared from Kisuke's sight. Old friends. Kisuke stared at the place where Muyang disappeared and muttered these words in a low voice. Then, the corners of his mouth curved into a smile. If that's the case, I can really relax. I'll leave everything to you, Kimura. Soul Society. Rukongai. In a remote rural area. The messy grass on the ground swayed in the bleak wind. Without warning, a black crack appeared on the wild grass. Then the crack expanded and in the blink of an eye, it became a door that could accommodate one person. Ta! A foot wearing black boots stepped out of the door. Then a man wearing a black trench coat walked out. Zanpakuto, which was carried in his waist, proved the identity of the person who came. However, his attire was obviously different from the ordinary Shinigami. Without Shinigami's signature straw sandals and tyrant costume, different from Shinigami's traditional clothes, the dress of the newcomer seemed more fashionable, closer to the current dress of the modern world. There was a clear difference from the dress of Shinigami who had persisted for 1,000 years. Soul Society, what a nostalgic feeling. Taking a deep breath of Soul Society's air, Muyang sighed with emotion. Whether it was the fresh air that was not affected by modern industry or the erasure filled in the atmosphere, all of it made Muyang feel refreshed. Closing his eyes to feel Soul Society's atmosphere, Muyang opened his eyes and identified the direction. Then he rushed to the Siriidii. He was not here for Soul Society's vacation, but had a clear goal. According to the plot of the previous life, Aizen is about to reveal his true face, and after he loses the protection of the previous mask of hypocrisy, it is time for him to settle accounts with him. Although he hates fighting with him, it is not what Muyang is happy to see to let everything develop according to the original work. Since he is here, he can't easily betray Soul Society like in the plot of the previous life. He has to leave something behind. In order to not let him have his way, of course, he had to do something first. Although it was a bit unrealistic to deal with him in one go, he had to collect some interest first. With all kinds of thoughts in his mind, Muyang did not stop. In just a short while, Muyang had arrived at the periphery of the Siriidii. Looking at everything in the Siriidii in front of him, a strange feeling was brewing in Muyang's heart. The first district near the Siriidii was naturally the first district of Rukongai. However, although Muyang was standing at the forefront of the first district and was closest to the Siriidii, no one seemed to see him. Whether it was the residents of Rukongai or Shinigami, who was patrolling inside the Siriidii. If one looked closely, one would see that there were layers of invisible wind surrounding Muyang's body. Through a series of optical reflections, although Muyang's people were standing there, the people outside could not see him at all. Although this was just a simple trick, it was unexpectedly practical to deal with ordinary people. This is really troublesome. Although outsiders could not see his body, and the ordinary Shinigami patrolling in the Siriidii could not see through his disguise, but to enter the Siriidii, those people were not the real problem to begin with. The real trouble was still the murderous stone. The spherical protective cover formed from the fluctuations of the murderous stone surrounded the entire Siriidii. To sneak in without alarming anyone, even for Muyang, it was not a simple matter. Muyang raised his arm slightly, and a weak fluctuation arose. The wind surrounding Muyang suddenly dispersed, but whether it was the residents of Rukongai or Shinigami in the Siriidii, they still did not see Muyang. Although Muyang was standing there, it was as if he was in a different space from them. He lifted his foot and did not alarm anything. Muyang walked into the Siriidii just like that, and the fluctuation caused by the murderous aura stone did not affect him at all. Walking into the Siriidii, Muyang's body shook, and his body immediately came out of the state he was in just now. His feet moved, and Muyang's body instantly disappeared from where he was. With his speed, after he moved with all his strength, even the captain could not easily grasp his whereabouts, let alone those ordinary team members. Even if Muyang passed by them, they would not be able to detect him at all. 100 years passed, and the modern world had already undergone earth-shaking changes. However, Soul Society did not change much, and all the arrangements were almost the same as 100 years ago. Although Muyang had left Soul Society for more than 100 years, he had lived in Soul Society for nearly 200 years before that. Even if he had left for 100 years, the layout here still clearly existed in Muyang's mind. But unconsciously, Muyang almost came to the place where he had stayed for more than 100 years before 10th Division. Looking at the new 10th Division in front of him, Muyang suddenly had a sour feeling in his heart. After 100 years, all the team members when he was still there were no longer there, either they died in the mission, or they left the team and retired. The current 10th Division was completely a strange place for him, and there was no trace of his existence at all. Looking at the new 10th Division in front of him, Muyang had a sense of loss in his heart. As for what it felt, Muyang himself was not sure. Now thinking about it, his decision back then seemed to be a little hasty. Although he finally chose a friend and fled with Shinji and others in the modern world, it wasn't because he was tired of Soul Society's dull life. By doing so he left all of his team members and friend. What a tough decision to make. For a moment, Muyang was stunned and fell into his own thinking. He clearly said that as long as he was there, he would protect 10th Division, but in the end? Who is it? Just as Muyang stood outside 10th Division and was thinking, a voice suddenly sounded, and then a little boy dressed in 10th Division Captain Haori and came out of the captain's room. Hearing the sudden voice, Muyang was shocked in his heart. He did not expect that he was so not alert and was so easily discovered. With a tap of her feet, Muyang's body swayed and he instantly disappeared from her original spot. "Captain, what are you doing?" A big sister with long blonde hair walked out of the captain's room. As she walked, the huge chest shook. The scale was enough to shock anyone. "It's nothing, Matsumoto." Releasing his hand that was holding Zanpakuto, the white-haired and blue-eyed little boy Chur Hitsugaya said this, but his eyes still looked around vigilantly. "I seem to have sensed someone here just now, but I didn't see anything after coming out. Maybe I felt wrong." "Captain, you must have felt wrong. There is no trace of Ryuryoku here, and there was no Ryuryoku before. Besides, if there is really someone, why don't you immediately rush out and see a shadow? Captain, you must be too worried about the accident." Although Chur Hitsugaya still had some doubts in his heart, after all, he did feel a trace of fluctuation before, but he did not feel any Ryuryoku, so he first asked to test, but what Matsumoto Ranjaku said was right. If there was really someone, in such a short time since he came out from the sound, there was no trace of leaving, even other captain could not do it, not to mention there was no trace of Ryuryoku left on the scene. Putting down the doubts in his heart, Chur Hitsugaya walked into the room. Perhaps he was too suspicious, it was the accident that made the Suriidii a mess, and until now, their Godii 13 has not obtained detailed information about the culprit of the accident. It's really a place full of memories. Muyang looked at him with a smile on the corner of his mouth. During the time he worked in Godii 13, he had come here many times. With light footsteps, Muyang slowly approached. On the roof of the captain's room of 8th Division. Hum 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 hum. Kuraku Shunsui hummed a song with a weed in his mouth. He folded his hands under his head, and the bamboo hat he often wore covered his face, blocking the dazzling eyes. His feet were still swaying casually over there, looking particularly leisurely. "Hey Nanao-chan, even if you come, don't deliberately hide your Ryuryoku like this. This is different from your usual style of doing things. Moreover, if you want to sneak attack me, why don't you hide your tracks together?" With his weed in his mouth, Kuraku Shunsui said lazily. However, even though he was talking, he still did not have the intention of standing up. He was still lying on the roof with a leisurely look. Muyang, who had avoided the inspection, had just stopped when he heard Kuraku Shunsui's words. The corner of his mouth could not help but twitch slightly. Although he did hide his Ryuryoku, it was not enough for him to mistake her for a woman. "I say, Kuraku, I haven't seen you for such a long time and you are still like this. Can you be a little more enthusiastic?" Hearing the familiar and unfamiliar voice, Kuraku Shunsui's body shook slightly, and the foot that was originally swaying over there immediately stopped, and even the grass in his mouth fell casually. "Hey, you are really an unexpected person." He pulled out a hand and removed the bamboo hat covering his face, revealing one of his eyes. Kuraku Shunsui had a serious look on his face as he looked at Muyang who was standing next to his head. Although it was a bit inappropriate to casually lie next to an unknown enemy like this, Kyoraku Shunsui only had a slightly serious expression on his face, but he did not move at all. It was unknown whether it was because he was confident in his own strength or because he was confident in Muyang's character. If it is convenient, can you tell me your purpose? Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I will not treat you as an enemy. Kyoraku Shunsui said. Although it was still a calm tone, the meaning revealed by the words was not ordinary. Obviously, he was not a pompous person like his dress. If it were for really said, he was a sharp and serious person. Nothing. I just want to see an old friend I haven't seen for a long time. Muyang glanced at Kyoraku Shunsui's serious expression and said. As he spoke, he casually sat beside him, without the slightest bit of worry. Just like Kyoraku Shunsui's performance, he was very chill. It was unknown whether he was confident in his own strength or had enough trust in Kyoraku Shunsui. Oh. Do you think I will believe your answer? Kyoraku Shunsui smiled, but his eyes did not leave Muyang's face. Instead, he looked at it seriously, as if he wanted to see something from it. Okay. Muyang shrugged and looked helpless. Of course, there is something I want to talk to you about. There is something I want to invite you to have a look. I just don't know if you are interested. Kyoraku Shunsui grinned. If it is your invitation, I think I am still a little interested. Can you tell me what it is about first? It is nothing. Most of it is old history. It has been 100 years. Kyoraku Shunsui's eyes flashed and his face showed an interested look. He looked at Muyang and smiled. Then I have to listen to it. I have always been very interested in the old story. In that case. There is no hurry. There is something interesting. Kyoraku Shunsui interrupted Muyang's words, met Muyang's puzzled eyes and said, I heard that you have a new disciple in the modern world. He is a very powerful little fellow. Ichigo of 11th Division was easily defeated by him. Hearing Kyoraku Shunsui's words, Muyang immediately knew who he was talking about. He did not expect that the battle between Kurosaki Ichigo and Ichigo has already happened. It seems that he has been delayed for a long time. As for Kurosaki Ichigo easily defeated Ichigo, to be honest, Muyang did not feel surprised. In the original work, Kurosaki Ichigo could defeat Ichigo, let alone Kurosaki Ichigo who had been trained in hell for more than 10 days. Moreover, Ichigo stayed in Soul Society for so long, and his combat strength has long fallen. Without actual combat, he's weak. However. Disciple. Muyang chuckled and said to Kyoraku Shunsui, that kid is not my disciple. I am just feeding him moves. It is just a dozen days of combat training before. It is a bit exaggerated to call me master and disciple. Isn't that still master and disciple? Kyoraku Shunsui looked at his old friend in front of him and his tone gradually became relaxed. Although the other party is still the target of Soul Society, there are many mysteries in the past. I remember that when you taught Captain Kuchiki, it was only combat training. That's different. Kyoraku, let's talk about something important first. Seeing that Kyoraku Shunsui still wanted to say more, Muyang hurriedly changed the topic, and if he continued to talk like this, he did not know where it would be. Kyoraku Shunsui no longer spoke, just looked at Muyang and motioned him to speak first. Although he was still lying there, looking lazy, but the serious expression on Kyoraku Shunsui's gaze made everyone not underestimate him. About Aizen, what do you think? Looking at Kyoraku Shunsui who had a glimmer of light in his eyes, Muyang revealed a smile. Damn it! How can there be so many Shinigami? Kurosaki Ichigo ran wildly on the main road of Siriidai, and behind him was a large group of Shinigami who was waving their Zanpakuto to chase. These guys are really annoying. Don't they feel afraid? Kurosaki Ichigo felt that he did not understand Shinigami's idea. He had just defeated a very powerful guy in their team, and it seemed that he was still in the third seat. These ordinary players should know that they were definitely not his opponents. Why did they still chase after him like this? If not for the scruples in his heart, Kurosaki Ichigo would have solved all these guys. However, if the third seat is only at that level, even the captain will not be too strong. The possibility of saving Rukia has increased a lot. Thinking of such a possibility, Kurosaki Ichigo could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. Although there was a certain gap between his strength and the team leader level described by Kimura, it should not be very big. After the battle just now, Kurosaki Ichigo felt that even if he faced the captain, he was not afraid at all. However, Kurosaki Ichigo thought of the powerlessness he felt when he fought with Muyang. What the hell? Who was that guy? Even the captain would not have such a level. According to the level of the third seat, Kurosaki Ichigo had no idea. The poor Kurosaki Ichigo had no idea that there was a fundamental difference between the vice-captain and the other team members. Especially for the captain level, if he wanted to use the strength of the third seat to guess the combat level of the captain level, it would be useless. Of course, there was one thing that he did not guess wrong. Even the captain level would not have the strength of Muyang. He kidnapped a member of the 4th Division, a guy who looked like a weak person. Under his leadership, Kurosaki Ichigo entered the underground channel to avoid the pursuit of many Shinigami. You said that you also want to save Rukia? Kurosaki Ichigo looked at this Shinigami in front of him, and his tone was surprised. This guy named Yamada Hanataro was really completely different from the Shinigami he met before. Such a weak guy was also Shinigami. However, although he secretly ridiculed the appearance of this guy in front of him, Kurosaki Ichigo was still surprised by the thoughts of the other party. In such a situation, his decision was almost at the risk of offending the entire Siriidii. Sure enough, everyone could not be underestimated. Even such a weak-looking guy had an absolutely strong heart. That was something that countless ordinary people could not have. Seeing the strong Shinigami who said his decision in front of him, although his body was trembling when he spoke, Kurosaki Ichigo still felt a sense of admiration for him. Although he might be weak, his spirit was worthy of Kurosaki Ichigo's respect. Let's go, take us to Rukia, I will definitely save her. No matter what difficulties there are ahead, I will definitely save her. Thank you, Mr. Kurosaki, you are really a good person. Ah, don't say that. Suddenly hearing other people praise him, Kurosaki Ichigo was a little embarrassed, such a straightforward praise. I just want to do what I have to do. After all, I still owe her a life. Glancing at the determination in Kurosaki Ichigo's eyes, Yamada Hanataro also smiled slightly. This boy may really be able to save Rukia, break through the solid palace of penitence, and save Miss Rukia, who was locked in the 4-deep prison. Mr. Kurosaki, please come with me. If there is an underground channel, the people of other teams will not come down to search. As long as we walk along the underground channel, we can avoid the inspection of other teams and reach the front of the Palace of Penitence directly. Walking around the underground channel with Kurosaki Ichigo and Shiba Ganju for a long time, Yamada Hanataro pushed open a sewer hole and sneaked out of it with Kurosaki Ichigo and Shiba Ganju. Fortunately, there is no one nearby. Come out, Mr. Kurosaki, Mr. Ganju. Yamada Hanataro sneaked out of the sewer and glanced around like a thief. After making sure there was no one, he lowered his head and said to Kurosaki Ichigo and Shiba Ganju in the sewer below. Finally out. The smell in the sewer is really unbearable. Kurosaki Ichigo climbed up from below and shook his clothes in disgust, as if he wanted to get rid of the smell on his body. However, in such weather, everything around us can't be seen clearly. Shiba Ganju, who followed Kurosaki Ichigo, looked around and said. They had been on the ground before, but who knew that it was already foggy outside? Such visibility, although it helped them hide their figures, it was the same for the enemy, not to mention that this was the base of the enemy, the base camp. It doesn't matter. Kurosaki Ichigo looked around and finally stopped his sight in front of him. Although the fog was thick and his sight was blocked, Kurosaki Ichigo could still see the majestic building not far away. After all, the Palace of Penitence was the highest building in Quiet Spirit Court. Is that over there, Hanataro? The place where Rukia was imprisoned? Yes. Looking in the direction of Kurosaki Ichigo's finger and looking at the building not far away, Yamada nodded. The direction that Kurosaki Ichigo pointed was the direction of the Palace of Penitence. According to others, Miss Rukia is imprisoned in the 4 deep prisons in the depths of the Palace of Penitence. That place is on the opposite of Sokayaku. It is said that it is to let the prisoner see the Sokayaku before execution to repent of his sins. That's good. Let's go. Ganju, Hanataro. Kurosaki Ichigo supported his Zanpakuto behind him, and after greeting Shiba Ganju, he walked straight forward. Wait. Mr. Kurosaki, are you going to save Miss Rukia like this? Looking at the back of Kurosaki Ichigo and Shiba Ganju, Yamada Hanataro opened his mouth to stop them. Of course. Kurosaki Ichigo turned around. Naturally, he said to Yamada. What this kind of thing, Mr. Kurosaki, don't you have any plans? If I'm right, there should be many people paying attention to the Palace of Penitence. Maybe there will be captain-level people, you. Although Yamada didn't finish his words, the meaning of the words was already very obvious. In any case, Kurosaki Ichigo and Shiba Ganju were just travelers. If they really attracted captain-level characters, they would definitely be caught or killed directly. You are so long-winded. No matter who it is, captain or vice-captain, as long as I cut down all the people in front of me, I can rescue Rukia. Looking at the teenager in front of him, Yamada Hanataro was stunned. He did not know why the other party could say such words so confidently and cut down all the people in front of him. That was Captain. How could he dare to say such words? And from the eyes of the teenager in front of him, Yamada Hanataro saw confidence and determination, and that seemed to be what he lacked. Slightly avoiding his eyes, not daring to look at the pair of confident eyes of the teenager in front of him. Yamada felt that there was an unspeakable meaning in the eyes. The meaning conveyed by the eyes slapped his weak heart over and over again, encouraging him to do something that he usually did not dare to think about and could only be buried in the depths of his heart. Huh. Suddenly, Kurosaki Ichigo reached out and stopped Shiba Ganju, who wanted to go forward. Without waiting for him to ask, Kurosaki Ichigo directly turned his eyes to a place not far away, which was the bottom of a building that must be passed to the Palace of Penitence. After listening to our conversation for so long, it is time to come out. Long time no see. I didn't expect you to still remember my name. Well done. Walking out from the dark, Abarai Renji habitually straightened the goggles on his forehead and stared at Kurosaki Ichigo in front of him. His eyes were absolutely not friendly. Thank you for your praise. Kurosaki Ichigo said with a sneer, and his tone was absolutely not friendly. Kurosaki Ichigo was not polite to his former life and death enemy. This guy, who is it? It is completely different from the Ryuryoku of those peep I met before. His Ryuryoku is extraordinary. Just feeling the Ryuryoku of this guy in front of him, made him have goosebumps all over, as if there were countless knives on him. Shiba Ganju felt uncomfortable all over, and Yamada Hanataro on the side was worse than him. At this time, he could not help trembling, even standing was not stable, just looking at the person not far away with horror. This person is Abarai Renji, 6th Division Vice Captain. Vice Captain. Hearing the words spat out from Yamada Hanataro's mouth, Shiba Ganju shook. Even the big brother he worshipped, the genius Shinigami in the past, was only a vice captain. The guy in front of him was actually a vice captain, so the 3 people on his side. It really surprised me. I thought you had been killed by Captain Kuchiki. Abarai Renji raised his foot and came over, and his mouth sneered and provoked. Although I don't know how you saved your life, but I have to say that it is very amazing, worthy of praise, but it ends here. I should have said that I will kill the person who seized Rukia's strength. As long as you are still alive, Rukia can't retrieve her strength. said, Abarai Renji's hand movements did not fall, while speeding up the pace to Kurosaki Ichigo. Abarai Renji suddenly pulled out his Zanpakuto, showing off. Kurosaki Ichigo was not inferior to Abarai Renji at all in terms of momentum. He reached out and grabbed his own Zanpakuto's hilt. Kurosaki Ichigo was full of fighting spirit. Just kill me then. Dang! Their sword clashed, and a burst of energy suddenly erupted. Where are you taking me? Kyoraku Shunsui asked as he followed Muyang. In the previous conversation, Muyang had told him everything that happened 100 years ago. Although he still had some reservations about what Muyang said, Kyoraku Shunsui almost believed him in his heart. After all, he felt that something was wrong at that time, but he did not find anything specific. You will know later. Muyang said with a smile. It was quite interesting to hang on to Kyoraku Shunsui like this. Suddenly, his voice changed and asked a question that had nothing to do with what they talked about before. Hey, Kyoraku, what do you think about Rukia this time? Huh? When he heard Muyang's question, Kyoraku Shunsui eyes flashed. At this time, Muyang would not ask any unrelated questions, but he just opened his mouth and said, does this matter have something to do with Aizen? Turning his head and seeing the meaningful smile on Muyang's face, Kyoraku Shunsui eyes flashed, as if he understood something, but there was still something he did not understand about this matter. What's so special about that little girl from the Kuchiki family? Kyoraku Shunsui turned his eyes and asked Muyang. This was the only possibility. Moreover, her particularity was very important. It was difficult to not connect them together at such a critical moment. Should I say that as expected of Kyoraku, I guessed it right. Muyang praised Kyoraku Shunsui, but did not say anything substantial, but there was still a smile on his face. Old fox. Kyoraku Shunsui whispered, but did not continue to ask. He knew that even if he continued to ask, Muyang would not say it. He could only wait and see what he was going to play. Kyoraku Shunsui knew that as long as he waited for the right time, Muyang would naturally say what he should say. This Ryoryoku is. Muyang, who was on the way, suddenly stopped and turned to look in the direction of the Palace of Penitence, with a smile in his eyes. What's wrong? Seeing Muyang suddenly stop, Kyoraku Shunsui also stopped. Then he immediately felt a collision of Ryoryoku from the direction where Muyang looked. Kyoraku Shunsui was shocked. He only felt Ryoryoku over there after Muyang stopped. Muyang's perception was actually so outstanding. Although this could not represent his strength, at least it could reflect some things to a certain extent. That was, after 100 years, Muyang's strength became stronger. Although he thought a lot in his heart, it was just a moment in reality. Suppressing the emotions in his heart, Kyoraku Shunsui said with a smile, one of the Ryoryoku is the Vice-Captain Renji. He is really a good young man. The other Ryoryoku should be the human youth, your new student. I said, he is not my student. Muyang turned his head and said to Kyoraku Shunsui, his tone was full of annoyance, but Kyoraku Shunsui still felt a trace of self-satisfaction from his tone. Why? Aren't you worried about him? Kyoraku Shunsui raised his eyebrows and asked. The opponent was the vice-captain, and the human youth was just a human. No matter how talented he was, he still could not fight against the strength of a vice-captain. If the opponent is Byakuya, I might be worried, but if he is just a vice-captain. Muyang shook his head and said no more, but the meaning of his words was obvious. If he was just a vice-captain, he was not a match for Kurosaki Ichigo.